All right, so it looks like we're going to do a deep dive into poverty in India today.
Sounds good.
You've sent over a ton of info about the history, the current situation, and even some potential solutions.
Yeah, it's a really complex issue with a lot to unpack.
Definitely. It seems like you really want to get a handle on not just how many people are affected, but like the reasons behind it all and what's actually being done to create some change.
Absolutely. And I think what's so fascinating is how India's approach to even measuring poverty has evolved over time.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so to understand where India is now with all this,
Yeah.
we need to kind of see where it started.
Right, like going way back.
Yeah, take us back to the beginning.
Okay, so even before India gained independence, think back to 1867.
Wow.
You have Dadabhai Naoroji. He was developing an early poverty line.
That early, huh?
Oh yeah, true visionary. He was really focused on the absolute essentials, like what does a person need to survive the cost of food, clothing, shelter?
So he was already laying the groundwork for how we understand poverty today.
Absolutely. His calculations showed that Indians needed between 16 and 35 rupees per year just to get by.
In the 1860s.
Yeah, back then.
I can't even imagine.
Exactly. It really puts things into perspective.
It does, and it seems like his work kind of sparked something, because after that, we see all these committees popping up, each trying to refine how we measure poverty.
Absolutely. And initially that focus was very much on calorie intake.
Okay, so making sure people could just afford enough to eat.
Right, exactly. But over time, things evolved. Thankfully, they started to recognize that poverty is about so much more than just an empty stomach.
Yeah, for sure. So
Yeah.
how did that understanding of poverty change?
Well, there was this major shift from simply counting calories to considering what we call the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI.
Okay.
And it recognizes that poverty isn't just about a lack of money, it's about lacking opportunity in multiple areas of life.
So instead of just looking at someone's income, the MPI is also looking at their access to education, healthcare, basic living standards.
Exactly. It's painting a much broader picture of what it really means to be poor.
Got you. It's like realizing that poverty is this complex web that impacts so many different aspects of a person's life.
Exactly. And this brings us to the present day.
Okay.
The good news is that India has made incredible strides in reducing multidimensional poverty.
Okay. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Well, between 2015 and 2023, the number of people living in multidimensional poverty fell by a whopping 17.89 percentage points.
Okay. That is massive progress.
Yeah, huge.
But despite this positive trend, there are still some significant challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's talk about those challenges.
Yeah.
How many people are we talking about here, and where are the biggest issues concentrated?
So even with all that progress, nearly 129 million Indians are still living in extreme poverty.
Wow.
To put that into perspective, that's like the entire population of Mexico
Right.
trying to survive on less than $2 a day.
It's hard to wrap your head around that number.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to get lost in the percentages, but when you actually think about it in terms of real people,
Right. Each
Um,
individual.
that's a huge number of lives affected.
Absolutely. And while poverty reduction has been faster in rural areas, there are still persistent disparities. Access to basics like sanitation, cooking, fuel have improved in rural areas, but the urban poverty picture is much more complex.
So we're seeing different kinds of poverty playing out in different parts of the country.
Yes, and it's also important to highlight that some states have made remarkable progress. Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, for example, they've seen a significant number of people lifted out of poverty.
Really?
They've really turned things around.
That's encouraging. But here's what I don't understand. India's economy is booming. We hear about it all the time. So why does this level of poverty still exist?
That's a crucial point.
It seems like something's not adding up.
And to understand this, we need to kind of unpack some of the underlying factors that contribute to this complex issue.
All right, I'm ready. Let's unpack it.
So one major factor is inequality. While India's economy has experienced significant growth, the benefits haven't reached everyone equally. The World Inequality Report from 2022 actually shows that India is one of the most unequal countries in the world.
So it's like a rising tide, but only certain boats are being lifted. Can you give us a more concrete example of what this inequality looks like?
Yeah, so for instance, access to quality education and healthcare is vastly different depending on your socioeconomic background.
Right.
Opportunities for advancement are often limited for those born into poverty, so it really perpetuates the cycle.
It creates a system where it's almost impossible to break free from those circumstances.
Exactly. And then we have the employment crisis, particularly within the informal sector. A staggering 80% of the workforce in this sector lacks job security benefits and fair wages.
Wow, 80%.
This makes them incredibly vulnerable vulnerable to falling into poverty.
It's a huge percentage of the population living with that constant uncertainty. It's like walking a tightrope every single day.
Right.
So what are some of the other factors that contribute to this?
Well, agriculture plays a complicated role. It employs millions, yet many remain trapped in low incomes. Government programs like PM-KISAN, which provides financial assistance to farmers, offer some support, but it's not a complete solution.
Okay, so PM-KISAN, just so I'm clear, is a program where the government gives direct financial aid to farmers.
Yes, that's right. It helps, but the underlying issues of low profitability and limited access to resources within the agricultural sector still remain.
So even with assistance, it's still incredibly difficult to break out of that cycle of poverty.
Unfortunately, yes. And as we see this rapid urbanization, another issue emerges: the urban poverty trap.
Okay.
People migrate to cities seeking better opportunities, but often end up in slums with limited access to housing, sanitation, and jobs.
So they're trading one set of challenges for another. It's like poverty takes on different forms depending on where you live.
Exactly. And to make things even more complex, we can't forget about the impact of health, education, and even climate change.
Oh, yeah, of course.
These factors can either contribute to poverty or worsen existing poverty. Imagine a family being pushed into poverty due to overwhelming healthcare costs or climate change disrupting their livelihoods, especially those relying on agriculture.
Right.
It's this complex and interconnected web of challenges.
It's not just one single issue we're dealing with here. It's a whole system of interconnected problems. It can feel a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
Definitely.
But I'm sure our listeners wondering what can actually be done about all of this.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And thankfully, there are a number of potential solutions that we can explore. And building on that idea of interconnected problems, it's crucial to remember that even though we're talking about millions of people, poverty is ultimately a very personal experience.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Behind all those statistics, we're talking about individual lives, families, each with their own story and struggles.
Exactly. So as we dive into these potential solutions, let's try to keep that human element front and center.
For sure.
We were talking about financial inclusion before the break.
Yeah.
Clearly a key piece of this puzzle, but how do we make it a reality for people who are already struggling?
It feels a bit like a chicken and egg situation. You know, they need money to access financial services, but they need financial services to manage their money effectively.
That's a complex challenge, for sure.
So how do we break that cycle?
Well, one strategy is expanding the reach of programs like the Pradhan Mantri Yojana.
Okay.
It aims to provide bank accounts to everyone, and it's actually been quite successful in getting people access to basic banking.
I've heard of that program. Isn't it one of the world's largest financial inclusion initiatives?
It is, but simply having an account is just the first step.
Right.
We also need to equip people with the knowledge and skills to use those accounts wisely and avoid falling into debt traps.
Okay, so it's about more than just access. It's about empowerment. It's like giving someone a toolbox, but also teaching them how to use the tools properly.
Exactly. That's where financial literacy programs come in.
Makes sense. What about microfinance institutions? I know they're often mentioned as a tool for poverty alleviation.
Yeah, they can play a critical role.
How do they fit into this picture?
So microfinance institutions, or MFIs, provide small loans and other financial services to people who might not qualify for traditional bank loans.
Okay.
This can be a lifeline for small-scale entrepreneurs or anyone trying to gain a financial foothold.
It's about giving people the resources to create their own opportunities to invest in themselves and their future.
Exactly. And when we think about empowering people to build better lives, we can't overlook the importance of skills development.
Of course.
Earlier, we talked about the need for the right kind of skills.
Right.
How do we ensure those skills align with the actual needs of the job market?
Yeah, it seems like there's a disconnect sometimes between the training being offered and the jobs that are actually available.
You're absolutely right. There's a real need to bridge that gap.
So how do we do that?
We need to revamp existing programs like the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which focuses on skill development to ensure that the training provided aligns with current market demands.
So instead of just teaching general skills, we need to be more targeted in our approach.
Yes, and that involves collaborating closely with industries and employers to understand the specific skills they're looking for.
So it's about creating a pipeline between training and employment, making sure those skills lead to real job opportunities.
Exactly.
Okay, now shifting gears a bit, we've been talking about long-term solutions, but what about addressing the more immediate needs of people living in poverty, things like hunger and malnutrition?
Right.
These feel like really urgent issues that require immediate attention.
Absolutely. Addressing hunger requires a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
Strengthening the public distribution system, or PDS, is crucial to ensure affordable food reaches everyone who needs it.
I know the PDS has been around for a while, but I've also heard it's faced challenges with things like efficiency and corruption.
There have been issues, yes. That's why it's essential to improve the targeting of beneficiaries and streamline the delivery system. Using technology, things like Aadhaar India's biometric identification system
Right.
can help reduce leakages and make sure the benefits are actually reaching those who need them most.
So it's about using technology to close those loopholes and make the system more transparent and accountable.
Exactly. And beyond just providing food,
Yeah.
we need to focus on improving the nutritional value of that food.
Right.
We need to make sure people are getting the nutrients they need to thrive, not just survive.
Absolutely.
That's where initiatives like the Poshan Abhiyan come in.
Right. The Poshan Abhiyan, that's a national program focused on improving nutrition, particularly among children and pregnant women.
Yes, it takes a multi-sectoral approach involving various government departments and community organizations to address malnutrition.
So it's not just about delivering food, it's about education and awareness,
Mhm.
equipping people with the knowledge to make healthy choices.
Exactly. And I think it's important to highlight that some states have really taken the lead on this.
Oh, really, Franco?
Odisha, for example, has implemented a very successful nutrition program. They focused on providing take-home rations for young children, setting up community kitchens, and training frontline workers to offer nutrition counseling.
Wow. So they're really making a difference.
Yeah, they are.
That's inspiring to hear. It's always encouraging to see these success stories, to know that real progress is being made. But I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. These bigger systemic challenges like inequality and climate change, those feel like massive, daunting issues.
Mhm.
Where do we even begin to tackle something that big?
They are huge challenges, no doubt, but we can't shy away from them. We're
Okay.
absolutely critical if we're serious about addressing poverty in a meaningful way.
Okay, so how do we start to chip away at these seemingly insurmountable problems? What are some concrete steps we can take?
When it comes to inequality, we need to focus on creating a more inclusive model of economic growth.
Okay.
It's not just about growing the pie. It's about making sure everyone gets a fair slice.
That's a great way to put it, but how do we make that happen in practice? It seems like a huge undertaking.
It does, but it's possible. It involves promoting policies that create decent jobs, investing in education and healthcare, and ensuring that everyone has access to those essential services like clean water and electricity.
It sounds like a lot of it comes back to that idea of opportunity, of leveling the playing field so that everyone has a fair chance to succeed.
Absolutely. And when we think about climate change, we need to remember that it often hits the poor the hardest.
Right, because they're often more reliant on agriculture and natural resources, the very things that are directly impacted by climate change.
Exactly. So we need to focus on building climate resilience, particularly in rural communities.
Okay.
This involves promoting drought-resistant crops, investing in irrigation systems, and providing training on climate-smart agricultural practices.
So it's about helping people adapt to the changing climate so they can continue to earn a living and support their families. Are there any other strategies for mitigating the effects of climate change?
We also need to focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, transitioning to cleaner energy sources, and promoting sustainable practices across all sectors.
Okay.
It's about thinking long-term and making sure we're protecting the planet for future generations.
And I imagine those efforts to combat climate change can create economic opportunities as well.
Absolutely. Investing in renewable energy, for example, can lead to new jobs and boost economic growth. It's a win-win situation for the environment and the economy.
I love that. Okay, we've covered so much ground here. We've talked about financial inclusion, skills development, addressing hunger, climate change, and even the role of technology in all of this. I'm sure our listeners feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this information.
It is a lot to take in.
What are some key takeaways you want them to remember?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that poverty is a complex issue with many interconnected causes.
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's
Right.
not as simple as just throwing money at the problem.
It's like a puzzle with many different pieces that need to be fit together.
Exactly. And that means addressing poverty requires a multifaceted approach that tackles those different pieces simultaneously.
So we need to attack the problem from all angles, using a variety of strategies to make a real impact. What else should our listener keep in mind?
I also want to emphasize that there is hope.
Oh, great.
India has made significant progress in reducing poverty, and there are many inspiring initiatives underway.
That's good to hear.
It's easy to get discouraged when we look at the scale of the challenge, but it's important to remember that progress is being made and there are dedicated people working tirelessly to make a difference.
It's about focusing on the positive and celebrating those successes, even as we continue to grapple with the remaining challenges.
Absolutely. And finally, I want to remind our listener that we all have a role to play in this fight against poverty.
That's a good point.
Whether it's supporting organizations working on the ground, advocating for policies that promote economic justice, or simply raising awareness about the issue, every little bit helps.
Beautifully said. This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've explored the history of poverty in India, delved into the factors that perpetuate it, and uncovered a wealth of potential solutions.
It's been a truly enriching conversation, and to our listener, I hope you found this deep dive both informative and inspiring.
And we're back for our final look at poverty in India today. It's easy to get kind of bogged down in all the complexities and challenges, but I'm actually feeling inspired by all the potential solutions we've discussed.
I agree. There's so much innovation and dedication happening, and it's good to highlight those successes.
Sure. Let's talk about some of those inspiring initiatives earlier. We briefly touched on micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, and I've always heard they play such a vital role in India's economy.
Oh, they really do. MSMEs are often called the backbone of the Indian economy because they have incredible potential to create jobs and pathways out of poverty.
Right, but I know they face a lot of hurdles. What are some of the biggest challenges they encounter?
Access to credit is a major obstacle for many MSMEs, particularly those in rural areas or those run by women.
Yeah, that makes sense. Without capital, it's nearly impossible to grow and scale.
Exactly.
So how do we address that? How do we make sure those businesses have the resources they need to thrive?
Well, there are programs designed to help. The Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme, or ECLGS, is a good example.
Okay.
It's a government-backed initiative that provides loans to MSMEs, giving them a much-needed boost.
So it's like a safety net for small businesses, helping them weather those financial storms and continue to operate. What about fostering a culture of entrepreneurship? How do we encourage more people, especially in rural areas, to start their own ventures?
There are some great initiatives focused on exactly that. One that stands out is the Startup Village Entrepreneurship Program.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
It aims to nurture a spirit of innovation and create a supportive ecosystem for rural startups.
So it's about providing resources, mentorship, and guidance to those who have the ideas but maybe lack the know-how or the network to get their businesses off the ground.
Exactly. It's about empowering individuals to become job creators, not just job seekers.
I love that idea.
Speaking of rural communities, there are some really exciting programs that leverage local strengths and resources. One that comes to mind is the One District, One Product Initiative, or ODOP.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that one.
Essentially, each district identifies a product that they have a natural advantage in. It could be a specific type of handicraft, an agricultural product, anything that the region is known for, and then the government steps in to provide support to develop that product into a major player in either the domestic or international market.
So it's about taking something that's already unique to a region and amplifying its potential, turning it into a source of pride and income for the community.
Precisely. And it's not just about the economic benefits, it's also about preserving traditional skills and knowledge, celebrating local culture, and fostering a sense of ownership within those communities.
Right. They're not just producing a product, they're building a legacy.
Exactly.
I love that it's a beautiful example of sustainable development. Now, shifting gears a bit, we've been talking a lot about rural areas, but I want to touch on those massive urban centers where poverty often takes on a very different form.
Yeah.
I imagine addressing poverty in a megacity like Mumbai presents its own unique set of challenges.
Absolutely. Rapid urbanization has led to the growth of sprawling slums where people often lack access to even the most basic services like housing, sanitation, and healthcare.
Right. It's like a whole other world existing within these bustling cities. So how do we even begin to address those issues?
It requires a multifaceted approach. We need to focus on improving living conditions within existing slums while also working to prevent future slums from forming.
Okay.
This means providing access to affordable housing, creating economic opportunities within those communities, and ensuring that basic services reach everyone. It's a complex undertaking that requires collaboration between government agencies, NGOs, and the communities themselves.
So are there any cities that are doing a good job of tackling urban poverty? Any success stories we can learn from?
There are definitely some promising examples. Ahmedabad, for instance, has implemented a very successful slum rehabilitation program
Yeah.
that involves relocating residents to better housing and providing them with skills training and job placement services.
Huh.
It's about giving people a chance to break free from those cycles of poverty.
That's fantastic. It's a holistic approach that addresses both the immediate needs and the long-term well-being of those communities. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we've mentioned throughout our conversation, the role of digital technology in the fight against poverty.
Right. It's a critical piece of the puzzle. We talked earlier about how digital exclusion can limit access to opportunities and further marginalize those already struggling.
But bridging that digital divide, especially in rural areas, seems like a massive undertaking. Where do we even start?
Well, infrastructure is key. The government is working to expand the reach of BharatNet,
Okay.
a program that aims to provide high-speed internet access to all gram panchayats or village councils across the country.
So it's like building those digital highways to connect even the most remote communities.
Exactly, but it's not just about the infrastructure, it's also about equipping people with the skills to utilize that technology effectively.
Right.
That's where digital literacy programs come in, teaching people how to use technology to access information services and opportunities that were previously out of reach.
It's about empowering individuals to navigate this increasingly digital world.
Yeah.
Are there any specific examples of how digital tools are being used to combat poverty?
Absolutely. One great example is the eShram portal, a national database of unorganized workers.
Okay.
It's a way for these workers who often fall outside traditional safety nets to access social security schemes, find employment opportunities, and receive government benefits directly.
It's like creating a digital safety net for those who are often overlooked.
Exactly. And there are countless other examples of how technology is being used in innovative ways. We have initiatives using mobile technology to deliver financial services to remote areas, connect farmers directly to markets, and provide educational content to children in underserved communities. The possibilities are truly endless.
It's incredible to see how technology can be harnessed for good.
Yeah.
It's like a force multiplier in the fight against poverty. But with all these different programs and initiatives, how do we ensure they're actually effective? How do we know they're making a real difference?
Yeah. That's a crucial question, and it's one that policymakers and development practitioners are constantly grappling with. It's not enough to simply launch programs. We need to track their progress, gather data, and make adjustments along the way. We need a culture of constant learning and improvement.
So it's about being adaptable, analyzing what's working, and being willing to shift course when needed.
Exactly. And it's about being transparent, sharing those findings, and learning from each other's successes and failures. It's a collective effort.
Collaboration is key.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the historical context to the current challenges and the wealth of potential solutions being implemented across India.
I agree. It's been a truly enriching conversation.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has left you feeling informed and empowered. The fight against poverty is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires persistence, collaboration, and a commitment to leaving no one behind. But as we've seen today, there's reason for hope, there's incredible work being done, and every effort, no matter how small, contributes to building a more just and equitable world.
Beautifully said. And remember, the pursuit of a poverty-free India is a journey we all share.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another insightful exploration.